Welcome to the Inside Startup Investing Podcast powered by Kingscrowd. As always, I'm your host, Chris Lustrino. From discussions with founders and VCs to industry experts and special guests, we want to provide you with the inside scoop on all things startup investing. Whether you're investing $50 a deal or $500,000 a deal, we have the stories you need to hear before clicking invest. From the metaverse to spaceflight and beyond, join us as we explore the world of startup investing for all. And now, on to this week's episode. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are here with another episode of the Kingscrowd Inside Startup Investing Podcast. Today, we have kind of a unique podcast where we're going to be talking with the three founders of OneDoor Studios. So you're used to investing in startups and technology companies. Well, today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. It's actually this idea that you can now invest and actually own a piece of the movies, which is a really, really cool concept. And these guys have figured out a way of making that happen. So very excited to have this conversation today, something a little bit different for you, and I think a really unique investment opportunity. So with that, Stephen, John, and Jay, the three founders of OneDoor Studio, are here with us today. Let's kick it off, guys. Thanks so much for being here. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you guys and how you came to found OneDoor Studios.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's great to be on your show. Really an honor to be here, man. So each one of us has some background in this industry. John is kind of the premier one here. He's got the most experience in the industry, 35 years doing distribution and contracts and rights acquisitions. And John, you tell him, not me.
John, you must have started when you were 10.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Jay. So yeah, writing, directing, producing, mostly on the business side of the entertainment industry, which is music to most investors' ears, because that's where they're looking for solidity and no compromise. And that's certainly what defines OneDoor Studios. But yeah, I've been involved in 30 plus motion pictures, over $4 billion in earnings. I wish I could say every one of them was out of the ballpark success, but most of them been really fortunate. Most of the pictures I've been involved with are studio releases, independent pictures released through major global distributors and studios.
Would love to hear, are there any notable ones that we should all know about that, would come right to mind for us?
Yes. So my first picture was in 1976. So that gives you a point of how old I am. And you've probably no one or very few people have ever heard of it. So I bring that up only to show that they weren't all blockbuster hits. Where's Willie? If you want to look it up on IMDb. But it was a great learning experience. But pictures when I started, fortunately, shortly after that, were pictures like Cat People, the older one with Natasha Kinski starring, The Terminator, and other motion pictures. Really, I've released through all the major studios. So most of the pictures that I've been involved with, you've heard, maybe not Four Feathers, still a great motion picture, or the Nutty Professor. Not the older one with Jerry Lewis, but the one with Eddie Murphy. So
some of my favorite stories come from his adventures in China, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah, it was a great experience. By the way, the first major studio release, even though it went through Sony Classics, it was still a great experience to produce with an all China crew. That was an amazing hit all over the world.
So we're talking with industry veterans here who have been around the block once or twice or 37 times before, know your way around Hollywood and being in the movie business. So it's interesting now, OneDoor Studios, you guys are currently producing a series of movies based on young adult novels. How did you find these novels, and what inspired you to decide to go down this path and start making films of these specific novels?
It was an adventure. We lived in China. Even Stephen lived in China. I lived there for 6 years. At the end of my time there, I partnered with a friend who was friends with the author, Nova McBee. She said, hey, sent us the file. Here's a manuscript you really ought to read. It's really good. It's not published yet. Mm-hmm. So John and I were, yeah. We're busy. And about a month later, I finally read it, and it absolutely blew my socks off. And I'd say everyone else who's read it feels the same way.
We had several great properties, and we were looking at what we were going to launch OneDoor Studios with. We wanted something that was just unquestionably going to make a statement. So when this came and we read it, we all agreed, oh my gosh, this is great. And Stephen's the least aggressive reader among the three of us. So it took him a little bit to get through it.
Well, no, that's completely not true. I would say that it's hard for me to pick up a book and then want to continue reading because I'm not a novel reader. I read like, periodicals and a how-to stuff. When I picked up Calculated, so it's a 430-page novel. It took me 3 days to get through it because it was just that good. And that's been resonated all around the world with the amount of awards that this Calculated series has been nominated for or won. In fact, Nova McBee was just in New York this last weekend for the Thriller Awards, where she was nominated with 5 other, among thousands of books, was nominated for Best YA Thriller of the Year. It's powerful.
So is there a specific kind of defined, kind of the definition to the types of movies? I mean, I know you're going after these young adult novels that you found really interesting and decided to pursue to start, but OneDoor Studios, do you have a kind of a definition of the types of movies you want to create? And is this something that you want to see grow into, a Warner Brothers type studio where it's just a massive, massive studio? Is that the goal?
So I think each of the projects would have to have a broad audience appeal. We're not looking for, like passion projects that are in a niche. We're not doing that. This Calculated has a wide, even though it's a young adult thriller, it's almost inaccurate because the audience is from my son, who's 14 on up to 80 plus years old, is saying these are incredible stories. Right. So broad audience appeal, I think redemptive qualities in stories, which I don't really believe there's enough of right now, done well.
There's about a third of the income for English-speaking motion pictures that are shot. About a third of the income comes from the United States. So the other 2/3 comes from the rest of the planet. So it being a global audience appeal is really important to us as well. And this has all of those kinds of qualities that we look for in a motion picture. And from a business standpoint, which, pardon me for going off of the dry side of things for a moment, but it needs to have an earnings to cost ratio of about 2 to 1, which means the actual negative cost of the motion picture, the production cost, needs to be about half of what the producer's share of income is. If it doesn't pass that test, then even if we really are crazy about the story, we won't produce it.
Once this kind of gets underway, for folks who are kind of interested in learning about this and potentially become investors, which we'll get into in a minute, when could they expect to see this on the big screen?
So Calculated right now, the first picture, which is already, the round is already closed for that particular picture. We're in about month 4 or 5 of the script writing process, which, by the way, we have Emmy award-winning writer Anne Peacock, who is known for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Chronicles of Narnia.
Wow.
So she's writing for us right now. So that process is about 18 to 24 months for the writing phase. And so I would say Calculated is about 3 years away from release. And the sequels, which is currently where we're live on, is a bit behind that right now.
We never hit it right on, but if we don't plan for it, and if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Oh, sorry.
Nice.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's a great point. Well, you mentioned that you've already raised funds for the first movie. Based on our calculation, I think it was somewhere around $2 million raised for that first feature film. So talk to us about what it's like to actually raise from fans. And do you think this becomes kind of a normal practice in the movie industry to actually raise capital from your fans before you even start production?
Let me just back up real quick on that, because before anybody thinks that the film is going to take $2 million to produce, that's not the case. The $2 million is development. The most successful production companies, independent production companies, divide development from production. Production costs are one thing, making the movie is one thing, developing the script and developing the IP is a whole other animal. And that's where we focus our energy and investments, is on the development. Because without properly developing the script, if you have an underbaked script, the story just doesn't really appeal to people, doesn't sing, then you're not going to get distribution contracts, which is what we do first before we ever shoot the film. So just to be clear on that, the $2 million is for development. The production budget of these films is roughly around $60 million for each film.
If I was an investor, I mean, most people don't invest in the film industry, frankly. That's what we're pioneering. But a lot of people invest in and understand mortgages and real estate, and it's a lot like that. So we're actually allowing people to leverage their investment. They're investing in the $2 million, which will get us a script that's fully studio acceptable, and it'll attach an A-list director and actor. And those elements combine to open the door to bank financing, which is guaranteed. There's film finance is a guarantor. It's bonded, in other words, insured. And it reduces the risk, but it also gives us that $60 million from the bank. And so the investment the investors put in is leveraged. We calculated about 25 times.
When the investor gets in, what do they own? Do they own a piece of equity in the movie? How does it actually work?
That's such a great question. So as Stephen said, because we divide them into two, we actually form a separate development company. And that company's fiduciary responsibility to the investors is we're going to get this prepared in any way, every way to qualify for bank production financing. We'll set the distribution. We'll do all of the scripting and attaching of talent and that kind of thing. And that company then is what the investors in development have a percentage of. So they get 50% of the development company's income from the picture. And the development company sells the picture to the actual producing entity, which OneDoor Studios also owns. And that company then is responsible for stewarding the distribution and release of the film and bringing in all of the global financing and that kind of thing.
Okay, so to keep it in language that I need fifth grade language because I'm the creative type. So it's basically the investors are sharing in 50% of the profits from the development company of the film. It's not an equity share; it's a profit share from each individual film.
Well,
Understood.
Calculated was not an equity; it was a profit share. But now it is equity, and
it's true. Equity. It is equity now. In the sequels, they switch it to equity simply because of SEC rules and stuff like that. So.
But that allowed us to then give the investors a 2-tranche income. So they make their money back plus a little bit before it goes into production, and they're paid literally out of the production bank loan. Almost everything that's spent during development is a production advance anyway. So it's for the script, which is usually $500,000 or $600,000. It's for the actor attachments, which is usually about $500,000 for director. It's 10% of their fee. So if they're a $5 million director, they get paid $500,000 to be attached. And the same thing with actors, it's about a 10% fee as well.
There's kind of financing along the way when you're making a movie, from that kind of development stage when you're just trying to get the right pieces in place to even go and get that larger financing for the actual production. And then at the end, there's a whole distribution component. So essentially folks are getting in at the earliest stage, and there's an opportunity, it sounds like on the first film, to share in the actual profits when it's all said and done. And for this second group, they'll actually get a return when you go into the production phase, and essentially you get paid back by the bank because you've now made it through that first hurdle to be able to build the movie. Is that a good way of framing it up?
Well,
pretty good.
Chris, it's actually better than that because the original investors get both of those tranches. So they make their money back when it goes into production. They also make 50% of the development company's profits from the profits of the motion picture when it goes into release. Most investors, when they get their money back, it takes all of the pressure off the investment. They realize, okay, everything else is gravy, so this is good. And the gravy part is often the only part that private investors have been able to share in. Right. This is the first time that we've seen that the public has had open to them the opportunity to have this leveraged position of investing in development that gives them both tranches.
I'm going to put it in my words, not yours, so that you don't get in any trouble here. but so let's say this was like a Spider-Man movie, right? Where it had a raging success and made a ton of money. If they go out and they make $300 million, over the lifetime of it being in the box office, then 150 million of that capital would be returned to the original investors as kind of the profit share. Is that a good way to look at it?
Well,
it would be
Yeah.
if there wasn't other people that were taking money. So when you're only talking about the theatrical release, and the theatrical release usually doesn't make the biggest part of the money. It's from streaming and the aftermarket television and whatever that happens. From theatrical distribution, if it did make 300 million, 150 million would stay with the exhibitor. That drops it, the theater owner, so that drops it down to 150 million. And then they call it prints and advertising, but now it's mostly advertising. That has to be taken off the top. And then there's a distribution fee that gets taken out from the studio. And then that balance is what goes back.
Right.
There are a lot of other investors and stacked parties involved. So you're partaking in a portion of the overall profits when it's all said and done.
I wouldn't say other investors, because our investors are the only investors, but there are other things like the theaters, like the distribution contracts, and that need to be paid back. But yeah, essentially what you're saying is true.
If you don't mind, Chris, I'm going to go
Understood.
ahead and ask a question that I think investors might be asking. They've heard of Hollywood accounting.
Right.
And is that happening with us, with OneDoor Studios? Where
And Hollywood accounting, briefly, people have said, the studios cook their books so that essentially there is no profit, so that the investors share in 50% of nothing. And sometimes those questionable contracts happen when the studio is funding the entire thing. Some producer goes, "Here's my story. Will you fund this film?" And they fund everything, including the production, development, licensing, everything. And then that may happen where they kind of, we'll get you your profits when they come, but they never come. Where in this case, we, as the independent producers, retain control of the film. We're not getting funding of the film through the studios. We get it through the bank, which has no interest in being a profit shareholder in the film. All they want is their interest on that loan. So makes the process much cleaner. If the movie flops, if the movie gets made and the movie flops, the investor still receives 100% of their money back, because the movie was made, because we don't make it until we get that bank funding. So
technically 110 to 125%.
Right. So it's really risk mitigating for the investor, because they're not worrying, will this movie do well? All they're worrying about is, will the movie get made?
Initially.
Initially. And if it does do well, then that's just gravy and icing.
There's the additional upside. Right. So there's two forms of monetization here for you, which is getting it back when it goes into production from the bank loan, and then a potential share in the profits when all is said and done.
Correct.
You got it, Chris.
Yep. Nailed it.
Ultimately, you want the movie to be successful, is what it sounds like.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
No, that's really helpful, because this is very different from investing in a startup and kind of just being a traditional equity investment and waiting for an exit or an IPO. This is about making it to a different stage of production, and then this is about having a successful film and sharing in the profits, whatever that profit is and however it's calculated. But there is an opportunity to make substantial money here, and also have a risk mitigated investment that looks very different from kind of your traditional startup portfolio. So as we've already talked about, you've raised $2 million for kind of that first film. Now you have a second raise going on right now. Let's talk about that raise. What exactly are you raising it for, and how can people get involved?
So we have the Calculated Story already has two other completed novels that are already out on Amazon. The first one's Simulated, and the third one is Activated, all by Nova McBee. The fourth one, the title was just released, is called Liberated. And so we are raising the funds to do all of the sequels. Now, people hear the word sequels and they think of Jaws 2, something of a lesser quality than the first, but we see this as like the Hunger Games. We keep kind of equating Hunger Games or Mission Impossible, where each one is a standalone amazing story. There is no, contrived second story. They're all amazing. In fact, people have said that the subsequent novels are much more powerful than even the first one, even though the first one's already winning awards. And I would say that's true. So that's our current project, and we're raising the development funds for all three of those films right now simultaneously on WeFunder.
It's a separate single company called Sequels. And that's what people would be investing in, those 3 pictures that are in that single company.
If people go on WeFunder right now, the goal would be 3.6 million, but that's not our final goal. That was just half of the goal because we decided to raise on WeFunder. We have a good relationship with them the first half, but it's a total 7.2 million or 2.4 million per picture.
Well, I know that you guys are probably a little bit biased, but I also think you're probably some of the best experts we have to discuss this. If you were an investor and you're thinking about coming into something like this, a project like this, what are some of the things that you think folks should look for when they're judging a crew and a production studio?
I'm currently an investor in another project, and the reason I invested in that project was because that producer had contracted John and Jay before I was part of their team to set up distribution and to do it the proper way. And I've also been on films and been DP and editor for films that was simply raised by investors, the entire production fund raised by investors, and with no thought to distribution. And I know that money was lost by the investors because no thought to distribution. So my first thing that I would tell investors is, if a film is being made, ask, how is distribution being set up? And that's not the first thing that they're talking about. It's not the story. I mean, story is incredibly important, but every element is equally important. The story, who's producing it, the director, and the distribution. You cannot skimp on any one of those things. So that's the first thing I would say.
Sundance is kind of a good cauldron to look at. They have thousands every year that are trying to get into Sundance to get distribution. Pictures already made, but they haven't got distribution set up for it. And less than 100 get in all categories. And if there's 10 in a year that actually pick up distribution, that's a big year. So with streaming, almost everyone will get streaming distribution. But again, if you don't have anything that brands the film, that pushes people to go cue it in, the likelihood of success is pretty low. So the big thing, Stephen is kind of right on the money. If the producer doesn't have a sense, or if they say, oh yeah, distribution, we're going to go on the film festival circuit and pick up distribution there, you can realize that the chances for that are really, really slim that it will be successful. So even if you like the people, even if you like the opportunity in other respects, if that's their distribution plan, better keep on looking.
I would add to that, part of what enables that is separating the production financing from the development financing, because what enables the producer during development to set the distribution is all the other elements. And what John is always teaching Stephen and I the most important thing, and the most important thing is that you don't cut corners on the most important thing, which is a script. John has always taught us the single greatest reason why films will fail is that maybe they might have combined those funds into one, and so they're hurrying. They're trying to. They didn't have time to finish the script to make it fully baked and fully cooked like it needed to be, and take the time and the resources and the money and all the things it needs. So that's why it's so important to have a separate fund for that.
Every project is produced 3 times. And the first time is in script form, and there's just no telling how long that's going to take. And it could take 14 to 18 months, which would really be fast, or it could take 3 or 4 or 5 years. You just have to go the distance on every project. So most producers have multiple projects that are in development, so they can give each one of them the time that they need to get where they have really become shooting scripts. And but the litmus test for that are the distributors, and they won't let you go beyond that mark. So I that may have missed your question a little bit.
No, this was super helpful. Well, guys, I really appreciate it. This has been very, very helpful context. As you mentioned, if folks want to go and invest, you can invest on WeFunder. They have their projects up right now, and you could be invested. I think it's a really unique and exciting opportunity, and something that we haven't seen very much of in kind of the equity crowdfunding industry. So kudos to you guys for figuring it out and making this possible. And for those who are interested in the movies and the stories, I think it's a really unique way to be involved and be a fan of what you're up to. So thank you all so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to watching the movies in the theater someday. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Inside Startup Investing. Before you go, if you enjoyed the show, please give us a like or a positive review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to like and share our latest episodes. And if you like what you heard and want to learn more about how we can help you manage your startup investing search, diligence, and management at KingsCrowd, check us out at kingscrowd.com. Thanks, and until next time, happy investing.